Well, good evening. Our things. Everybody good? Good, good. We're wrapping this puppy up. All right, and I thought last week's was terrific. It felt like a finale, but there's more for me to whip you with. A little bit. So we've undertaken an historical critical. That's a particular set of words. Historical critical look at the second book of that which we call the Old Testament. Okay, and historical critical is the word critical makes it sound negative. It isn't. It just means that you can approach the texts of the Bible, both Old and New Testaments. You can approach them through academic eyes as opposed to religious eyes. You can approach them through history. We know more today about the Bible, especially in the last 75 years, than we ever did. Research, discoveries of materials out there, more and more. It is a study that like it's never been before. In a sense, it has become a science, and as opposed to solely a set of religious documents, and that has repercussions with it as well, which we'll discuss a little bit more tonight. We've discovered that the biblical and historical account of how, when the Canaanites came to be in the Nile Delta of Egypt, they're nearly identical in how they got there. While the biblical account isolates the Canaanite migration to a single family, right? Remember? The single family of the patriarchs and then the 12 sons of Yaakov. The historical shows an unimpeded flow of Canaanites moving into the Delta from the whole region. That's a significant difference. What we talked about last week is that according to the biblical take on it, every single person that's in Egypt, every single person that leaves Egypt, they're all related to this one family. Okay, they are utterly separate from everyone else, all on their own. It's here that I have to introduce a feature of comparison that that Bruce and I have kind of developed over the years. Grandpa, tell us a story about when, and then you fill in the blanks. A, lots of us went down to Egypt. Okay, that's historical. Only our ancestors went down to Egypt. Well, and the answer is it's better. It's a better story of B, just us, right? When we created our own kingdom in the Delta. Now that sounds good, but if you do that, you don't get what needs to have happen out of it. So B, we were enslaved by Egypt in the Delta. And the choice goes to, again, B, right? I think most of these are going to be B. A, we were driven out of the Delta by a young pharaoh named Ahmoses. And B, we were led out of the Delta by one of our own people, a hero named Moses. Okay, well, these are the choices for this. We were driven all the way back into Canaan, driven all the way there. Egyptians behind us, just on our heels the whole way. We all went to the mountain of God on our own. We left on our own. Well, it's a better story, Grandpa. We were denied protection in Canaan. The Canaanite cities said, you're not coming in here. We're not coming in here. B, we received 10 laws from God and much more. Okay, this diversion into Midian. Okay, but we're not going to go with the historical. It's not a good story. We had to move up into the hill and high country because we were denied protection in the trade route cities. Or we finally were free to move back into Canaan. All right? Better story. We raided the trade route cities. Remember we talked about that? The Abiru up in the mountains. They had nothing up there. B, we killed everyone in Canaan and moved right in. B wins again. Okay? This is the comparison between our historical and our biblical stories for the return. Now, our Revolutionary War had two views, didn't it? Us and them, right? A, we committed treason against the crown. Or B, we fought for justified independence from British tyranny. Right? Right? And it all depended on which side you're on, what your point of view was, right? If it's B, we fought for justified independence from British tyranny, that's us, right? But the Brits saw that we committed treason against the crown. I know people today that still refer to us as the colonies, okay? Remember, anger takes a long time to straighten out. Canaanites in Egypt has two views, right? Abraham's descendants freely left Egypt and conquered all of Canaan. That's our biblical view. It's huge, it's powerful, it's winners, right? They're the winners in the story, right? And the Hyksos were driven out of Egypt and into the hill and high country of Canaan. That's the historical, but boy, it's not a good story, is it? It's not a good story. It sort of fizzles out. And it all depends on one's source of choice. Are you going to go with the Bible? Or are you going to go with history? And if you have trouble between the two, we got a problem. So one is historical, right? The Hyksos. And the other is biblical. And for some people, this is a huge, huge challenge, you know. Biblical authority is a rather interesting thing. There's an old joke of a woman saying that if the King James Version was good enough for St. Paul, it's good enough for her. You know, wow. Yeah. Well, so that's what floated out of heaven into Paul's hands on Easter Monday. Hot off the presses. Still warm. Still warm. And this is often the case in dealing with the challenges of the Bible. And historical critical certainly it just opens the floodgates for honest, serious, necessary, mature appreciation of the texts that we say are the spine of our faith. I have a neighbor across the street. She says, I bring up, you know, what I'm teaching or something like that. They ask about it. And she says, she's a strong evangelical. And she says, oh, I don't believe any of that. Wow. I don't even know what to say then, you know. The greater question, of course, is why would these authors, writing in Babylon in the 5th century, hundreds of years later, why would they write everything that they wrote at all? Why do it? Do people do things for nothing? Not at this level. They don't do it for nothing. What does it all accomplish? It's a great question in all of this. Can we even... Pardon? And the question then is what? What does it accomplish? What did they feel that they were accomplishing or could accomplish or did accomplish? Did this accomplish anything? So are they merely writing for everyone to enjoy? Us included, right? All of this was written just for posterity and for all of us to go, tell us a story, Grandpa. And the Bible just says, I can cough one out right now. Is that all this was written for? Is there a reason for this? What does it accomplish? Is an important question. Yes, sir.
What puts the Levites on the top rung?
What puts them on the top rung? They say they are.
Well, that's it.
They
go back to Jerusalem at some point. They're at the top of the heap.
Right. It's good. It's good to be the writers of everything because you get to place yourself in the top rung. And they intended to return and to rule. They certainly did. Yes?
It gives divinely appointed right to the land.
Yeah. Yeah. All these things. Isaiah. Hal's favorite book. The one that just makes all kinds of sense to Hal. Isaiah it's like a tsunami of language, of words. And actually it says really just one sentence, maybe a paragraph. That's all it really says. But it is awash in language that is carefully crafted to bring it to a certain point that says, we've suffered in Babylon more than you have, and God gives us Canaan to rule because of it. And it says so. It says so. Isaiah 53, the end of the suffering servant language. It says, and a reward, there will be long life, lots of children, and divide the spoils. That's never attributed to Jesus, is it? We don't hear about Isaiah after the suffering servant. We don't go on to the very next line because it doesn't apply to Jesus. And that's what I would encourage all of you is we're all awash in our traditional experience of what we've, gosh, it goes back to Sunday school, doesn't it? Of what it all means. And it's so informed by our traditions, but oftentimes our traditions are actually counter-biblical. They're not biblical, but because we've held on to them for so long, we just assume they are. You know? I'll put it back to you again. Who would you go with? Paul's writing about his own conversion or somebody else is writing about Paul's conversion 40 years later? Which would you choose that would make more sense to you? Acts is a better story, but it's not Paul's. Paul's very concise about how he converted, and it doesn't include anything in Acts. And yet Acts is always quoted for Paul's conversion. Grandpa, tell us a story. It's better, isn't it? It's not Paul. So are these valuable stories that at some level contain kernels of profound truth that inform us of God's intent for our lives? That's a lot of words. Does the Old Testament have just wonderful moments that just really illuminate? And if so, can you give me an example? Give me an example. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm saying, what is it in the Old Testament that is truly beautiful and that takes us somewhere?
Micah 6:8.
Say it.
He asked a question about what's necessary for salvation.
Yeah.
Love mercy,
Yeah.
do God,
Do good.
and walk humbly with your word.
I love it.
One translation is do justice.
Okay. I like it. I like how clear it is. Okay? I like how clear it is. It is certainly a lot better than the killing that's around it. So what do we do about justice from the same authors who are saying, walk as you say?
Love mercy,
Love mercy. Murder has no mercy in it. There's so much murder in it. How can that be a part of it at the same time? It's a dissonance. So my question is God both violent and just at the same time? Violent. Because it's found in equal measure in the Old Testament. The Marcionites, 2nd century, big troublemakers, 2nd century in Christianity. The Marcionites, they held to the idea that the God of the Old Testament could not possibly be the God of the New Testament, because one is a violent God of wrath, and then the other is a God of love. And Marcion was considered an absolute heretic because, of course, the idea was that there could be only one God. And Marcion was saying, then explain how pathologically these two gods are not even close to the same. And it's a good question. I don't have the answer, but it's a good question. Sometimes Grandpa tell us a story can get into trouble. Tell us a story. This is Donald's inner thoughts moment, okay? So I have to decide, do I pause? It's only 17 after, so I'm assessing the time because I want to be fair with this. Bruce, this is my solution to my conundrum I shared with you. Assess the room. You all look like you're in it. Okay, it's only 17 after. And then I need to decide what's next, and I'm going to decide what's next, and we're moving on. I got another round of that later. I take the Bible seriously. I really do. I take it very seriously, so much that I believe that the content of both the Old and New Testament texts deserve respect for each and every word that we have access to. Respect for that. I don't think we're supposed to fiddle with it for any reason. I believe that translations that ignore the source text in favor of other translations is nothing short of irresponsible. I believe that. I do. I believe that translational efforts must be as pure as possible without concern for the results, even if they are uncomfortable. Even if what it actually says is uncomfortable, I think it is very important and respectful to the text that it be accurately stated. Accurately. I believe that intentional alteration of the text to muddy, hide, or steer away from what is actually written is both disrespectful and deceitful. Have you gathered that I feel pretty strongly about this? I think that it is a rock, and we do not chip away at it because we don't like sections of it, and yet there's plenty of this. I'm delighted to see more and more revisions from traditional language to accurate translation, regardless of the resultant shock or even angry disappointment. There are sections in here, in the Bible, that are absolute minefields because of the words that are written. And historically, translators have fiddled with them so they don't say what they say. And I think that's terrible. I think it's terrible. The existent text sources are not to be fiddled with to make us happy. They are exactly what they are, and they do not serve us. They don't serve us. The texts are there. Translational history reveals a shift from a religious approach to an academic approach. The sheer volume of footnote insertions was once the emerging face of academic effort, right? Used to be a whole page of text, and boy, for a while there wasn't any little A or B or anything on the bottom. And now it's a half a page and then a half a page of footnotes. That's all a result of academic effort for it, okay? So great has the footnote section grown that the content of the notation is now making its way back up into the language it is revealed. It's moving up. So if they have discovered something, but traditionally it says one thing, but they've discovered something, and it's been in the footnotes, there are Bibles now that are correcting it up in the language, making it say what it says, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it causes something from us. Isaiah 7:14. For those of you who've been with me, bear with me. This is what it says in Hebrew, all right? It's what we have in English, but it's here. And here's a hot word in there. That's a hot one, right? It's Bethula in Hebrew. And it means a virgin. It means a virgin. In Isaiah 7:14. It goes on, it says a virgin, this is pregnant, births, and in a second I'm going to put it all in the right order for you, right? And there's the last one. And here's what it looks like. A virgin births a son, names him with us-el. That sounds convoluted, but that's a translation, word for word. Except, and it even says that in all of our Old Testaments. Every Old Testament you have is going to say this, that Isaiah says this, but it's been fiddled with. That word means this. It's not that with the other word in Hebrew. It's Alma. It's not Bethula. It's an Alma. Bethula is a virgin. An Alma is a young woman. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but boy, run that forward, and you got a big problem, especially on Christmas Eve. You got a big problem. A young woman bears a son and names him with us El. It's not a virgin in Isaiah. It's not a virgin in Isaiah. It's a young woman. It's an Alma, not a Bethula. And yet, when they did the first translation of the Hebrew Bible, including Isaiah, into another language, which was Greek, they changed it from Alma to Parthenos in Greek. And now, what do we have from an error? We have that Jesus is virgin birthed and half divine because of it. You see how far reaching a little translational error is? And here we are, 20 and a half centuries later, and it's still in our Bibles. It still says virgin. So even, as I said, it's even in our versions that are changed, it's retrofitted into Hebrew. It says another word than the one that's written. Now, Isaiah 7:14, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and she will name him Emmanuel. 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 And that's what it says in your Bibles. That's what it says in your Bibles. That's what the traditional Bible has looked like. And then it started to look like this, a little a. Hebrew, Alma, young woman. Way down there at the bottom. Way down there at the bottom. That's progress. That's progress. And then there are new Bibles that say this. They change it to the absolute accurate original, and it's done. And these translations get so much heat from the Christian community. It says, see, a young woman will conceive and give birth to a son, and she will name him Emmanuel. And that's what it actually says in Isaiah. But we have a problem, don't we? Because in Matthew, Matthew makes reference to this as the prophet. Matthew does. And Matthew is reading the Greek translation. Matthew doesn't read Hebrew. Matthew writes in Greek, and he reads a Greek Old Testament. And so he says what he says, what we get. It's what he says in Matthew 22:23. All that was spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled. Behold, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel. That's what it says in all of your Matthew 1:22 through 23. It says it in all of them. It says them in all of them. And now, pardon? Leave what alone? The Alma? Why did they change it? It was a simple error on the Greeks' part when they translated it. They just translated the wrong word. Instead of young woman, they wrote Parthenos, a virgin. There's a vast difference between a young woman and a virgin. Okay, especially when it comes to giving birth. So these are things that continue with us. And I use this one because it's a very easy one to go over. And now we're seeing Matthews that are seeing the A's now. Okay, because Matthew has made a mistake. So we're seeing that little A in there. And there are new ones that are coming out where even Matthew is being corrected to reflect Isaiah that is correct. And it's highly controversial because it changes a lot. Jesus, I've heard people say, Jesus needs to be special, and the virgin birth makes him special. Okay? It's a simple thought. So what does this mean to the modern church? What does it mean to our modern church? This kind of need to adhere to, desire to adhere to accuracy, change, loss, pain sometimes. It changes our tradition. It changes it. And how does the church retool with this? What are we supposed to do with an academic, critical edition of our Bibles that changes a lot of things? It's no small thing that she wasn't a virgin. It's no small thing that Mary wasn't a virgin, because it's based on an error. Does the church even need to retool? Is there any reason to change any of this? Why not just continue with what we've always known? Isn't it fine just the way it is, the way it's always been? Isn't it? Why do we need to even say that any of this is important? Well, the modern church is in crisis. Would you agree? It's been happening for quite a long time. What's the crisis? Anybody? Anybody? Membership. Church membership is just dropping steadily. Churches are joining with other churches to try to survive. Does anybody remember when the sanctuary was always full? What is it now on average? Half? I can't hear anybody. Half? Well, that's significant, isn't it? And that's reflecting this. So the church is in crisis. The crisis is, the result of crisis is dropping membership. This is a problem. And now this is going even faster. It's plummeting. It's plummeting. So everybody should ask the question, why? Why don't people go to church anymore? Why don't they? Modern people do not find to be reasonable, on the whole, the supernatural or the miraculous. Traditionally, we've never had a problem with that. But it is a problem now. It's a problem now. Such things are not found as convincing. All right? It can seem absolutely absurd. They simply cannot tie their 21st century pretzels into first century knots. Quotation from John Shelby Spong. It is a generation, a new group of people that just don't find reasonable that Mary was a virgin when she bore Jesus, and more things like that. And it's a challenge. Traditional Christianity has found the supernatural or the miraculous to be comforting proof of Jesus being more than us, of being divine. That has served us. It has served Christians for absolute centuries. And yet, there's something about that now in our modern times. People have access to information faster and more immediate than at any other time. People know stuff. It isn't just having gone to church when you were a kid and your parents did. It's more than that. But if being virgin birthed isn't hard enough, willful mistranslation just takes the cake, doesn't it? That feels like deception. And this stuff is out there. You can translate anything. You can look it up in a second. You can say, boy, I'm not comfortable with this one issue. I find it hard to believe. You enter it on Google and you'll find all kinds of information about it. It's not so simple. It's not so simple, and they don't go to church. That may not be the only reason. I think it's a big one. Historical academic advances in biblical source study have continued without pause over the past 75 plus years. It's a new science. Traditional language has been challenged like never before, and much has been exposed as both in error and incorrect. That's not saying it's tearing it down. It's showing it enough respect, the biblical text, that it at least be accurate. That which is traditional is not always biblical. It's not always biblical. Traditional Christianity feels under attack by this. It feels under attack. If you were taught and continue to believe that Jesus was virgin conceived, to be shown anything different naturally feels like an attack. But I like it that way. I like it that way. But what if 10, 20 young families just can't do that? Is your like it that way, even though it's not biblical, is that more important? That's a tough, mean question, wasn't it? What about the allure for the younger generation who find the supernatural and the miraculous to be at the least bewildering, but it certainly is not enticing to them? And yet, thorough historical academic research is not an enemy. It is, in fact, the Bible's staunchest, unbiased defender, because it values it enough. Yes?
These are the same people who don't like the supernatural that go to see the monster movies and the alien movies and the science fiction novels, and they believe that those are credible.
No, they know that those are entertainment. They know it's entertainment. And they can't then cross the line that says something as fantastical is real and not entertainment. They know the difference. Your point is well taken. They are the audience for the supernatural and the miraculous, the amazing, the impossible, but they know the difference. They know it. The church needs to offer them more. What could the church offer more than Grandpa tell us a story? While many traditions have come under great scrutiny, it is the resistance to change that continues the attrition. We're not going to change. Is the traditional church more important than accuracy and growth found in the ongoing and respectful study of the Bible? Is it more important, the traditional church, than accurate study of the Bible? It's tough. But it's what I've always known. I want it to stay the same. And the attrition goes on. Donald's inner thoughts. That was a little segue, okay? And we've got time, and I think this is going to be a pretty quick one. Getting back to it. For me, the greater questions are these. Which God is the God who speaks to Abram? Doesn't say. But you ever wonder? Who's talking inside of his head, or that only he can hear? Which God is talking to him? Which God? Which God is the God who speaks to Moses on the mountain through a burning bush? Which God is that? There's lots of gods, right? It's polytheist. There's pantheons abounding. So does the Bible tell us, actually, in the text and through historical study, does it tell us who these guys are? And are they the same God? Shouldn't they be the same God? Wouldn't you think they'd be the same God? But the text tells us something. And what God do the authors in exile worship? Is it the same one as those guys? Or are they all three the same? Is the God ordering genocide our same God? That's the Marcion question. Is the God who ordered all the killing in Canaan, is that yours and my same God? And worse, can Jesus be attached to such violence? Is Jesus a part of this line of violence? Just a part of it? So which is the God of Abram? The authors write of Abram leaving Ur from Haran to Shechem and Bethel, there in Canaan, and then from Bethel to the Negev, and then he goes to Egypt and gets into trouble because he passes his wife Sarai off as his sister, and he gets into trouble with Pharaoh. Finally, returning to Bethel in Canaan, where his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren are born and raised. Born and raised in Bethel, in Canaan. The whole family's there. It says so. It says so. In Haran, a God makes a promise to Abram that all of his descendants will be set aside, right? This is the covenant. They'll all be set aside. Abram builds altars on the high places in both Shechem and Bethel, both in Canaan. Note the language. He builds altars on the high places. That's a big clue. Through our religious training and traditions, we believe that the God of Abraham is a new deity, not previously heard from. The God, the for really's God, all right? There's a slew of other gods that are not really gods, but our God, the God of our Bible, the God that we believe, that's the God. That's who this is. But it doesn't say so. It gives us lots of clues. Genesis 12:8. He went to the mountain, he, Abram, went to the mountain east of Bethel and set up his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai, which is another city, on the east. He built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Genesis 12:8, talking about Abram. Is that language clear or not? What does he do in Bethel? Sets up his tent. What does he do? He built an altar to the Lord. Where do you build an altar to the Lord? It said so before. At the top of a mountain, in the high places. That's what it says. Here's what it says in our handy Hebrew. Okay? Well, let's break this down a tiny little bit. Well, from that statement in English that's in all of our Bibles, what's the name of the city? Bethel. Right? It's Bethel. It says so, doesn't it? Twice. Were it only so simple as that. How many of you would prefer an absolutely accurate translation of every word found in both the Old Testament, mostly in Hebrew, some in Aramaic, and the New Testament, right? The New Testament, written entirely in Greek, none in Hebrew, entirely in Greek, without any liberties taken at all. An absolutely critical, accurate, academic translation of the Bible. Show of hands, how many would like that? I would like that it's accurate. At least it's absolutely accurate. No fiddling. No fiddling. I'd like that too. In Hebrew, this is phonetic. Vayatek misham hahara mikadem laveit el, vayet oholo, beit el miam vehai mikadem veyavin sham, mitzbeach l'shem vayikra b'shem shem. That's what that Hebrew above there says. Okay? We're about to find out. Well, we got these two things up there. These two things that are up there. And guess what that means? L. L. Just means L. Okay? And if you fill out the word there, that is Leveit El. Remember on the English translation? It said Bethel. Here it's Leveit El. Okay? Already a change. Up here, on the other side, is this. It's Beit El. It's where the name Bethel comes from. But in Hebrew, it's two words. Beit El. Actually, three. Okay? And those are our words that apply in here. Now, he went to the mountain east of Bethel, is what your translation is going to say, and set up his tent with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. He built an altar to the Lord, and he called in the Lord's name. That's what it says. You asked what it says? That's what it says. And we've assumed that it means Bethel, because it says Bethel, Bethel. Right? Except it says Leveit El, not Bethel. It doesn't say that. East of El is what Leveit El is. It's east of El. Okay? So the translation that's correct for that first line is, he went to the mountain east of El. Is east of El the same as Bethel? No. Take a guess at what city we're talking about. If you're east of El, and El's the city, it's El. The city's called El. And then there's Beit El, which means city of El. So what's the name of the city? It's El. And yet our translations go along with the modern title of the city, which is Bethel. Kind of like Bethlehem. It's Beit Lechem. Lechem is bread, city of bread. It was probably the main bread production center that served the bread needs of Jerusalem. It's very close. It's Beit Lechem. What's the name of the city? It's Lechem. But we call it Beit Lechem. This is Beit El, city of El. Leveit El doesn't mean Bethel. It means east of El. Does this mean anything? Does this matter? Well, you know, it's accurate, and it actually informs us a little bit more about Abram and what is he doing. Okay? Now, it says he built an altar to the Lord and he called in the Lord's name, but it doesn't say that in Hebrew. In Hebrew, they don't say the word, a name for the Lord. They don't call the Lord the Lord. They use Hashem, the name. The name. Shem means name. And all of our translators decided that we were not going to do that. So we used the Lord God, and all kinds of other things. That it is not what it says. El was a major worship city for the god El. It was a sacred city for the god El. Who is El? God is the head of the El pantheon of 74 gods. 74 gods. Abram built an altar on the mountain of El. How do you worship El? You build altars on the mountain, on the high places. That's how you worship El. Abram created an altar at a major El shrine and city. Abram and Sarai will raise their children there. Their grand and great-grandchildren were all born and raised there. Who do you suppose they worshipped? El. As early as oh gosh, my thing is running on its own. I got to stop it. No, it is. It's running on its own. I wonder. No, miraculous. 1st and 2nd Kings, only 6 Davidic kings did right in the sight of the Lord. 6 of 21 Davidic kings, heirs to David, because they didn't engage in Elohist-style worship. Okay? Here's an example. Amaziah became king. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord. This is a formula. And then it goes on. Only the high places did not end. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. Who are the people worshiping on the high places? El. They're El worshipers. You have this competition between the Yahwehs and the Elohists. And this is the main issue in the Old Testament. And the other 15 kings were El worshipers. It says so in Kings. That's a shock, isn't it? You would have thought that all of those Davidic kings, all of them would have been Yahwehs. Third. So who's the God that speaks to Moses on a sacred Midianite mountain through a burning bush? We just established that Abram is living in Bethel and he's building altars in the high places. If you do that, you just might be an Elohist. You probably are. So who is speaking to Moses? Historically, the Midianites worshipped a mountain lunar god named Yahu. We've covered this, right? The Ugaritic Hittite text placed this Yahu as a minor son in, of all things, the El pantheon of 74 gods. Okay? The god's name is actually Yahu, with an aspirate in between, but has been anglicized into Yahu because we like vowels very much. We like vowels. Yahu is a Y and a W, each followed by aspirates, little puff of air. Yahu, Yahu. Sounds a lot like Yahoo. Sounds a lot like something else, too. Bruce, what does Yahu sound like? Yahweh, exactly. It is identical to the tetragrammaton of Yahweh that we have, mispronounced as Yahweh, okay? But remember, this language has no vowels. Hebrew has no vowels, nor does Arabic. They are implied. They are implied positions that are built out of the consonants. As a singer and a linguistic snob, this was my business for 30 years. How does sound come out? For as much as the authors in Babylon stated that the name of God could not be spoken or even written, right? This was a rule. You can't do this. It found its way into a multitude of names. Kings and prophets and lesser people. The name of the God that met Moses in a burning bush is found everywhere. 4 Davidic kings of Judah, okay? Ahaziah, we would say Ahaziah, Yeah, Ahaziah, Amaziah, Hezekiah, Josiah, the list goes on, right? That's what we know them as. In Hebrew, they're all this, okay? Written from right to left. What's at the end of each one of them? It's this little sound here. It's this little sound. And it looks like that. And we pronounce it as Yahoo. It's Yahoo. Yahoo. It's at the end of all of these. Then there's Isaiah and Jeremiah and on and on and on of the prophets. The ending is the same. We've lopped off the ending vowel. We say Hezekiah. It's Hezekiahu. Hezekiahu in Hebrew. And it means of Yahoo. That's the God. Mighty of God. We are handed on a silver platter the name of the God that met Moses through a burning bush on the mountain of God in Midian. It's the same God that the Midianites worship. It's Yahweh. It's the same God that the Edomites south of Canaan, they worship. Yahweh. Yahweh. And it's right staring us in the face. I'm not making anything up. I'm just looking at the text. And it says that. So it becomes Ahaziahu to us. Amaziahu, Hetzekyahu, or Yosyahu to us, if we're going to stick with that thing. But it is more tidy with this Yahu, Yahu, Atzyahu, Amtsyahu, Hetzkyahu, Yeshyahu. That's accurate. And the ending is of God. Whether it be Yahu or Yahu or Iyah, it all means of God. It's the identification. How about Benjamin Netanyahu? It's still happening today. We're not supposed to name the name of the God, and yet it's in all of this literature. It just slipped through. Wasn't taken that seriously, evidently. So based on the king's names ending in Yahoo, but in English, it's Yahoo. It's just there. It's right in front of us. So there's El for Abram, and there's Yahoo, who's a minor son of who? Of El. They're in the same pantheon. It's father and son. Now, how did we get from El with Abram, and how does it shift to Yahweh with Moses? Well, it just does. It just does, because the information is there. The chosen people, through the covenant with Abram, shift now to the chosen people with Moses. And guess what they worshiped by choice at the base of the mountain when Moses hadn't come down after 40 days? What did they worship? A golden bull. A golden bull. A bull worship was another form of El worship. El, when there wasn't a high place, when there wasn't a mountain around. Bull worship was. And the God Yahweh and Moses were not pleased when they had made this, were they? This is a battle between a father and a son in the language of the Elohim, of the El Pantheon. Okay? So the single greatest challenge in all of the Old Testament is the conflict between rather minuscule Yahwehs. The Yahwehs, they were a little tiny group in Jerusalem, and everywhere else in Canaan, they were El worshipers. The whole region were Elohis. And this little tiny little island of Yahwehs were lodged up in Jerusalem. That's historical. The deity who spoke to Moses via a burning bush on Midian's holy mountain, he was named Yahweh, and would become over time what we would know and what would carry the weight into today as Yahweh. Yahweh. That isn't a coincidence. It's YHWH. The aspirate is right there. It's Yahweh. Yahweh, the Midianite God. So what does this mean to the modern church? What are we supposed to do with this information? Heaven forbid something has been revealed to you that I think is probably pretty shocking. Because we have been told that the God, the only God, is the God of Abraham and the God and on and on and on. And yet the writers have given us a ton of information. It's not interpretive, it's what it says. So what does it mean to the modern church? Again, it's hard. It's not the traditional thing that we've always known. It's not that. But maybe that's not the most important thing. Maybe church-going and religion and Christianity and the message, maybe they're a lot more. Maybe they're a lot more than that. How does the church retool? Does the church even need to retool? Isn't it okay that we just stay the way we've always been? Sure, that's a choice. Sure, that's a choice. Traditional Christianity has always held Abraham as being our God's covenant focus, and yet Abraham as an Elohist is not comfortable for us, and yet it's biblical. Moses as being our God's covenant focus, that's ours, and yet Moses as a Yahwist is uncomfortable. But the history and the text support them. This is the problem with something like I teach, historical critical. This isn't a Bible study as you've known it. This isn't. This is a study of the Bible, which is a little different. So is the message of Jesus legitimized by his Jewishness, his connection to all of this stuff? To all of this that precedes Jesus? In the environment that he grew up in, the religion that he grew up in, is it legitimized by his Jewishness, his message? Paul tells us that the most important aspect of Jesus' existence was that his Jewish sacrifice on the cross appeased the angry Jewish God and places believers eventually into heaven. This is what Paul teaches, okay? But only after they die. Christianity you only get to cash it in after you die. I've spoken to so many people, I have family members, what does it mean? What is the message of Jesus? What's the gospel? That I get to go to heaven after I die. That's the gospel. And yet, the message is so much more than that. The message is about another time, not then. It's about another time. And yet there is that love of one another thing that we talked about last week, okay? Well, how do we fit that into the idea that I'm waiting to go to heaven? Is it Jewish or universal, this love one another thing? Does Jewishness own it? Do Christians own the concept of love one another? Is it only born out of our neck of the woods? For all of Paul's emphasis on heaven, or then, but only after you die, okay? The message language is focused entirely on now. Love one another. When? Now. Right now. And we talked a lot about that last week. That's my inner thoughts. I don't think I'm going to go on. I think it's time for us to talk a little bit. I think that what I'm trying to say is, I don't think that churches can afford to be museums or time capsules. I think when we get so locked in with our traditions and our traditional languages, and, oh, Lord, we get so used to words like the omnis, all the omnis that God, and some people would say, well, all that God really wants is, please, excuse me? This is all language that we've gotten so used to. I couldn't begin to tell you what God wants, can do, God's limitations, what God expects, what God accepts, what God rejects. I couldn't begin to tell you that. I know that there's lots of stuff written in the Bible that informs of that, and I know a lot of people that have their own versions of that. But you know what? I don't find any of that to be divine. I think God is what God is, and we each meet God from where we are. And I think it's highly personal, but I think when we get collective, it gets dangerous sometimes. And then we can become these bastions of religious authority. And yet the message says, people matter, love one another. And it's all around us. The ditch is all around us for us to get down into. And sometimes a church can actually cause us to become like the Levites who go on the other side of the street and walk away. Gawks by, he doesn't have time. How can we become like the nobody, the nothing, the Good Samaritan, who has clearly, he's not given any status. I mean, say Levite, and you're talking about the creme de la creme in the Jewish world. This guy is from Samaria. The Samaritans are considered dogs in the Jewish world for a lot of reasons. And yet, he found a way to go down in the ditch. And is that not what Jesus is asking us to do? Do you think Jesus is asking us to wait until we die to go to heaven? Do you think Jesus is asking us to just sit and wait to go to heaven after we die? I don't think so. I think the big argument of the first century was whether sola fide, faith alone, was correct, or James saying faith without works is no faith at all. So what is a church? Is it a museum? Is it an edifice? Is it a clubhouse? What is a church? What goes on in our church? What does it take for people to feel like it's not nonsense to come to church? We have to recognize what the nonsense is and be willing to look at it closely. But if all we do is hang on to traditions, then the attrition will continue until the building is sold. Church should be a machine, a tool for loving one another and the greater community. With the power of the collective of the group, what it can do, Wednesday nights are proof of that. People coming together. People coming together. It's not a dark night that the church is only alive on Monday or Sunday mornings. There's so much more to all this. And it's exciting to think about that. But you know, it's like growing pains. It's going to cost. It's going to cost. Our comfort zone may not be more important than the survival of the church. So what does Jesus have to do with Moses and Abraham and all of this stuff? It's not called the New Covenant, the New Testament for nothing. I don't think Jesus has any lineage to it. I think Jesus doesn't carry on anything about being God's chosen people via Abraham or via Moses or what tribe he belonged to. I don't think it has anything to do with it. I think Jesus is a prophet of peace, and at a time of great violence. And I think that is what's so shocking, and I think it's what got him killed. After all, historically, we kill our prophets of peace, don't we? Killed 3 of them last century. It's what we do. They're a threat to a lot of things, prophets of peace. What does it take to follow Jesus? To the rich man, young man, what does he say? Go and sell everything you own, and then hand over the proceeds to help the suffering of the poor, and then you can follow me. And the man walked away sadly. What does it take to follow Jesus? Paul says you get to heaven, you get everything for nothing. Faith alone, sola fide, you get everything for nothing. You get to go to heaven when you die. The message says you give everything for nothing. When it's your turn to be in the ditch and to help, be there. And this is why all of this stuff ultimately leads us through this horrific violence of the very world that Jesus says this age has to be at an end. Reflected by genocide, God-ordered genocide. And Jesus says, this has to end. And the solution is the kingdom of God, where we retrofit Swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. We change and we grow. We turn around. This is the role of the church. And we rejoice in the good news. Jesus is not related to the Old Testament at all. He has broken away from the violence of that because he's living in a time of great violence of that. And all we're being called to do is say, today's my day to build a brick for the kingdom of heaven. And here we are. And it's exciting. And a little scary too. And I thank you all for listening to me rant and rave. Thank you so much. I hope that I get to teach again sometime. As my wife says, Rachel likes to say, I can't do anymore. I can't take anymore. I'm full up. I can be pretty intense, and you know that. So, I just wish you all well. I thank you for staying with this stuff, and I'm not telling you what truth is. I'm telling you what I find fascinating and what I've discovered, and these things matter to me. They don't have to matter to anybody else. I'm not anything more than myself in this. But I thank you for listening to my thoughts on it very much. And thank you for 10 years of doing so. I appreciate it a lot. All right. Thanks, Sue. Thank you very much, folks. Be safe out there. Yeah, please be sure to sign up so I look good.